So, welcome to the second Interloop live stream. Together today with me is my co-host, Eysi, who's one of the three founders of Garden and our CTO. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? And yeah, we'll talk about what we're going to get into today.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be finally on the Interloop Live. So yeah, my name is Eyþór. There's another Thor on the team actually, so I often just go by Eysi to keep things simple. But yeah, I'm one of the founders of Garden and CTO. And in terms of background, what I typically tend to say is that I'm kind of a application developer at the end of the day, by heart and soul. One of those, well, I suppose, poor unlucky souls that got really thrown into a turmoil with when all things cloud native technologies started happening, in particular Kubernetes. Myself at my company at the time and my co-founders as well. We basically felt that a lot of things got left behind in terms of developer experience when our respective companies made the move to containers, to Kubernetes, and to all things cloud native. And we felt that surely, we can do better than this. There's also an opportunity here to leverage all this awesome, fantastic technology, not just to run and run our containers in production, or make sure they're healthy, or make sure they scale up or scale down depending on our needs, or make sure that we're able to monitor them, but also speed up the process from like which code goes from our laptops to these containers that run most likely in Kubernetes or your cloud runtime of choice in production. We saw a big opportunity there. We've learned a lot along the way. This was back in 2017, 2018, but we've been more or less working on that problem ever since, and more or less based off of the same kind of philosophy. Like, we've tweaked things here and there, but like in terms of like the product architecture and kind of the core ideas, they've more or less stayed the same. But like, our target audience has changed a little bit since we started. First and foremost, it was directed towards developers, but we also see that DevOps engineers are very excited about Garden, and even platform engineers or SREs for that matter. So we're catering to a wider audience, I suppose, than we originally thought. And yeah, I mean, fast forward 5 years, I'm sitting, in Interloop Live with Tao. So here we are.
Yeah. So today we're both Eysi and I. We're gonna go into how to get Garden up and running within. We're saying within 8 minutes. I think you can do it in even less if you want to, but that's our target. and before we showcase how you get started with Garden today. Specifically, we're going to get into the Garden free tier, which is a sort of graphical UI that offers all these features on top. A lot of people who already use Garden may not be familiar with these features, so we're going to showcase those today as well, and also kind of preview some upcoming features to the free tier coming soon. So I want to talk a little bit about the foundations of Garden. Now, this is just a graph that I found on the internet, and this is a continuous deployment sort of like a diagram, right? But you can also say that Garden is also working on the software development lifecycle model. How a developer would typically program, and especially if they're a cloud native developer, they're typically going to provide their software as a container image. So building their code into a container image is going to be a very important part of that. Then, they're going to be doing testing. Most developers, don't do enough testing. We want to make testing easy and fun. And so testing is a sort of built-in primitive of Garden. So building, testing, deploying, this is another action. And then finally, not committing, but runs. These are our scripts. So if I go here, we'll just go into the Garden docs briefly, and you can see our list of actions here on the sidebar here, and all of the action kinds. So you can see here we have the build, deploy, test, and run. And so these are the foundational primitives of Garden, and what we're going to be talking about today. Building, again, container images, deploying any sort of service. Typically, when we're talking about deployments, we're talking about a Kubernetes cluster, right? And that's going to take care of your service. We also support things like infrastructure as code, but we'll get into that a little bit later. All right, so Eysi, if you will kick us off on what we are calling dashboard-driven development. I just sort of came up with it very briefly, but it kind of it's cute, it's fun. I think it captures the magic. Let's get into it.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, I think Garden has had a little bit of a reputation among the tools in the space of being slightly more complex than the others, and in turn more powerful and more flexible. We've been putting a lot of work into and a lot of effort into being, remaining flexible and powerful, but also making it easier to get started with Garden. So hopefully I can kind of dispel that. Well, I'd like to argue that it's a myth today. At some point in time, it may have been true, but I would like to think that getting started with Garden is not all that hard. So let's just get into it. In terms of timing it, in terms of 8 minutes, like I'm gonna be honest up front. Like a lot of it is there, so I'm just going to be uncommenting things and hopping between branches. So I don't know if it's a fair comparison, but so to take it with a grain of salt. But I think if you really put your mind to it, you can get pretty far in 8 minutes, depending on how fast you type, or how good at you are at copying config snippets from our website. Let me see, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So we're starting simple. There's not much here. This is just an empty terminal with 2 windows. In the top, I have my IDE. I'm using NeoVim, and below just a terminal screen. And the project we'll be configuring is a 3-tier web application with API and web components that we're going to build and deploy and test, and a database component that we deploy as well. Now, typically, if you're using Garden and you're using Kubernetes in production, you have a more complex project. So we have users with, dozens of services for that matter, and up until hundreds of services. Like we have users with 500 services. So, a 3-tier web application is maybe not representative of the type of stacks our users typically have, but, I'm not gonna configure 500 services maybe in 8 minutes. So we got to start somewhere. So we're starting simple. But what we go through here today, it translates to a system of any size. And actually, one of the good thing about Garden is I'm just going to be configuring these services one by one. But if you have hundreds of services, you would be using a primitive of Garden called config templates, when you kind of author a config or set of configs once, and then you reuse that for all the services in your system. So you don't need to write 500 deploy actions one by one. So it's a API and web services plus a database, and this is kind of a complete project. That is, we have the Docker files in there, we have the Kubernetes manifest. These could also be Helm charts for that matter. And what we're doing is we're adding Garden to the mix, so that we can kind of add the automation that allows us to reuse these things for other stages of delivery. So not just production, but also for CI, your staging environments, and all the way down to development. So I'm gonna start actually. So Tao, you were talking about actions earlier, right?
Yep, that's right.
So we mentioned we have our deploy actions and build actions. It's almost like if you imagine a CI pipeline. They will have jobs, and the jobs will have names like, build this or test that or run that script. And then these jobs will have steps, where you specify, step by step, all the things that need to happen to, build this or test that. Garden's actions are similar in a sense, except they have a semantic meaning. So instead of just a job with the name, say, build, it's actually a build job. It's a job of kind build, and it can have, say, type container, and that's really all that Garden needs to know to build a container. Or it can be a job of kind deploy and type Helm, and Garden will figure out how to install this Helm chart, right? So it's like a semantic smart CI pipeline, if you will.
Right. So like a build for a container, we know sort of that this is going to build a Docker file into a container image, and a deploy for a Helm type would deploy a Helm chart to a Kubernetes cluster of your choice.
Exactly.
Right.
Whereas like in your like CI pipeline, you might have something like, deploy underscore API underscore with underscore Helm underscore, and then you just like specify what that is. You have your Helm install, or like, Helm repo add and all these commands. But this is just like, this is saying, do a Helm install for me. And here's the context. But you don't need to specify, like you do away with all the boilerplate. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run the Garden dev command, which starts my dev console. So I don't have any actions yet. You can see they're all like kind of commented out. I have a project level configuration, but nothing beyond that. For this particular example project, I'm going to deploy it to a remote Kubernetes cluster that I've set up. But if you don't have one at hand, you can use our new ephemeral Kubernetes plugin, which is basically just a zero config way to get started with Garden. You use a provider called ephemeral Kubernetes. You run a Garden deploy. We spin up the cluster for you on demand. It's super fast, and you're off to the races. You can learn all about it in our. Yeah, so go ahead.
We literally provide anybody a free Kubernetes cluster for their sandbox. So that's just a killer feature of using logging into the free tier in itself. Is just this free Kubernetes cluster. You can do whatever you want with it. We don't care. Enjoy.
I mean, if you need to mine Bitcoin, but like very, very, very slowly because it's very, protected and you get like limited resources, then sure, go ahead.
Yeah,
that's your opportunity. It's our dime. But yeah, you can learn more about that by just checking out the quick start example in our documentation. But anyway, so I run Garden dev. I don't have any actions. I just have to have the project set up, the project level Garden.yaml configuration, and it prints a link to my kind of a dashboard, basically, which I am going to open up here. So this is a part of both our enterprise and our free tier products. Everyone has access to this. You need to run Garden login, and then your first Garden command, in this case, Garden dev, to start up the dashboard and the live page. And basically, when you're in dev mode, when you have the dev command running, Garden is streaming logs and information to the dashboard, and you can also interact with Garden from the dashboard. So you can see it just like, logs a couple lines, but not much going on. I'm going to switch over to the graph view, but there's nothing here because we haven't added any actions. We're just getting started. So coming back to the configuration, we're going to add our first action, and it's an action of kind deploy. It has the name DB because it's for deploying the database that's part of our 3-tier web application, and it is a type exec, which is not the most common Garden action. Exec actions are the escape hatch action types, or like the ones you use when you're testing things or exploring things. What they do is they just execute a script on the host that Garden is running in, like in this case, just my laptop. Now, Garden is all about running things in production-like environments, so typically you don't use that much unless it's for like auth scripts or like, I don't know, like moving things around. But here we're using it to kind of create a blueprint of our system. So before we go into Helm and containers and all that jazz, we just want to, figure out the lay of the land, if you will, using the exec action, because it really requires no configuration. So here I'm adding an exec action for deploying a database, but it's not really deploying a database. It's just echoing this string. I'll add another one here for.
As the timekeeper here, we're 5 minutes in, so we've got 3 minutes.
Oof. I feel confident, Tao. I feel confident. So, switching to the graph view, we have our two actions here: the one for deploying a database and the one for seeding the database. And you see it has a dependency on the database being deployed. Easy. Like, this is super intuitive. Like, we're building, deploying, and running things, and these things have certain types. So let's just, in the interest of time, uncomment all of these, switch back to a graph view, and voila, we have our entire system laid out. We have a blueprint of the system, if you will, this 3-tier web application with actions for deploying the database, building and deploying the API part, building the web part, so on and so forth. And we also have a test action that kind of sits at the end of the graph for end-to-end or integration testing our stack. We can run these actions just by interacting with the graph, and it's just going to echo out a bunch of strings. It's super fast. If I check out the logs view, you'll see it's just like, building API, building web, so on and so forth. So not much is happening yet, but we have a feeling for how our system is put together. We have everything there, and now we can gradually replace these placeholder actions one at a time, and try and do that within the allotted time. So I'm going to start with the action for deploying our database. So what are options here? Like we have a few options. You can look up the options in our documentation. In the interest of time, I'm just going to tell you right away that we're going to use the Helm type to deploy a database via Helm. So the spec for the action is going to be, of course, like it's going to depend on or be determined by the action kind and type. So let's copy in the spec for deploying, a Helm action and hit save. And all you can see, like what I'm doing here is I'm telling Garden like what Helm chart to use. I'm just pulling in an off-the-shelf Helm chart for Postgres, overriding a few values. But apart from that, that's everything Garden needs to deploy a Helm chart. Switch it back to a graph. Let me see. We should see. I might have messed up some things as I was copying things. For what it's worth, I am running on a bleeding edge version of Garden. I like to keep it interesting in demos, so things are bound to fail, especially when it's live. But you can see right here that the action now has type Helm, whereas before it had type exec. And now, if I run the action instead of echoing out a string on my laptop, it's actually going to do a full Helm install. So you notice it's basically doing a Helm install Postgres. Change the log level here just to make it a little bit more palatable.
So some people just quickly, some people may notice that where Garden is working on a declarative structure here. So if you're familiar with like Helm imperative commands, you have to remember this like big long Helm command, or you just but in Garden, like if you've used some of these like declarative Helm tools before, like Helmsman, or previous company, we used one of these tools where we'd spec out the values and the chart itself. That's similar to what's going on here. But Garden is just so much more than any of these tools that you've used. Anyway, please continue. Yeah.
Yes, will do. But yeah, so you can, that's the whole point. It binds together a lot of your existing tooling as opposed to replacing it. Anyway, so we're deploying Helm now. Next up, we're going to replace the action for seeding the database instead of just echoing seeding DB, which is not very useful. We're going to use type container here. So we're using the Kubernetes plugin, and the type of the action is container. And what that means is that when the Kubernetes plugin sees a run action of type container, it's going to spin up a pod with that container image and execute whatever command you specify. So let's change the type from, actually, let's make sure we do it in the correct order this time around so I don't mess up the config. So we're going to change this to type container. We're going to copy in the correct spec. We're going to remove this. And all I'm telling Garden is to use the kind of the Postgres, the same Postgres image this time as a container. As opposed to Helm chart, we also have Helm run actions. And then to run this here action for seeding, or like this here command rather, for seeding the database. Nothing special. Like it's it's a simple project. We're just creating one table in the database. Again, I can switch back to the graph view. We can see now that this has type container, whereas before it had type type exec, and I can now run this action as before. And what's going to happen? It's going to start by checking the status of the database, because it depends on it. It's going to find that the database is already deployed. So it's going to proceed to run this here, proceed to run the action to seed the actual database, proceed to seed, if that makes sense.
Right.
So we've already like replaced 2 of our placeholder actions, and rather than going through the rest of them one by one, I think it's safe to just hop over to the main branch where we have the rest of them filled out. Are you okay with that, Tao? Am I cheating?
Let's go for it. Yeah.
All right. So I think
so we got 2 services up, I think, in time, and I think that's good enough.
Yeah.
But for the purposes
I mean, for the
demonstration,
promo video, we just cut out all the ranting that I did in between and get it down to like 2 minutes. So anyway, I'm gonna check out to my main branch here, but I think like, yeah, that file doesn't even exist anymore. You just go here, for example, look up the API. But like the point I want to get across though is like, you know, it shouldn't feel intimidating to like, you know, add Garden to a project. You can start like 1 or 2 actions at a time. It's good to use something like exec to get a feel for like to create this blueprint really of how your system fits together. And then just like 1 action at a time, like replace them with the real thing, run the action, see if it works. If it does, move on to the next one. But like, you know, it's do it piecemeal, basically.
Yeah, no, I like that because you're scaffolding your microservice stack ahead of time, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So if you're not the developer, if you're somebody upstream from your developers at a company, and you're going to be like, you know, you're thinking about how am I going to plan this out? How am I going to plan this stack out so that my developers can have a good time? You want that level of flexibility to be able to scaffold out something really quickly and then say, oh, okay, this is how this changes this, and we'll get into that a little bit later on how Garden caches all of these dependent steps, so that you know. But it's great to just have this visual aid I've found at when I'm working with Garden.
Yeah, exactly. And I like whether you're configuring Garden project or anything else, just like, you know, small incremental improvements that's the name of the game. Whether you're writing code or like, you know, updating your infrastructure, iterating on processes, you know, just like, you know, one thing at a time, make it better, then move on to the next thing, as opposed to trying to do everything at the same time, and then it all fails fantastically at the same time and makes for that much worse of a debug experience, I suppose. But anyway, so now I switched over to the main branch. So whereas we had all these exec actions before, we have our containers, our Kubernetes deploy actions, and end-to-end test that is run as a container. And again, I'm using the phrase end-to-end here, but this could be like an integration test, an API test, a test that depends on other parts of the system being up and running. So that will mean different things to different teams. So I've been running these actions from the dashboard because it's nice. It gives you a visual UI. You can see kind of how the dashboard responds to it. But you can also do it directly from the dev console if you are a terminal person more so than a dashboard person. So it has autocomplete. It gives you the name of your actions. You can run deploy to deploy all the things, or deploy and then the name of the deploy action to deploy a specific action, but it will always count for dependencies. So if I run deploy here, it's basically gonna build and deploy all the actions that need to be built and deployed. And I know I mentioned that at the beginning, but all of this is running in a remote Kubernetes cluster. So right. I don't even have Docker running on my laptop. Both the builds are executed remotely in cluster, but also obviously the services are deployed to that cluster.
We have a question, by the way, from a viewer, and Raphael asks, can the credentials be redacted automatically in the logs output?
So typically, are you referring to any specific credentials?
I'm not sure if they're still with us or if they'll respond, but
that's a great question. So typically, Garden will just basically return
Postgres SQL.
Oh right, yeah, for sure. So that just depends on basically your Postgres or Helm configuration. So that is something. So Garden is really just kind of a layer on top of these tools, and you would use the kind of underlying functionality to do that. Like a common pattern is, for instance, to use with Terraform to configure Terraform in such a way that it masks out the values. For this simple, silly example project, we're not really We're just hard coding these values. So Postgres has just the password Postgres, but for proper like real world deployments, we would actually suggest people use Garden's secret management functionality, which is part of our cloud and enterprise products. So in that case, you can store all your secrets and configuration securely via Vault with Garden Enterprise, and then reference them in your config without them ever being, in your version control source code, for instance, or visible to other people.
Right, and it goes with it's worth saying, I think, that our secrets integration in the enterprise makes it really easy to have those secrets integrated. But if you're just getting started, or you're free tier, or you're a developer, you can also provide. You can use, for example, like an external secrets operator and other things like that, just to get started. Before you jump in for the full enterprise version.
Absolutely. Like whatever you're doing today should more or less translate naturally over to your Garden project. But yeah, I think we have the project deployed. This is
great.
our.
Yeah. So maybe I could jump. So one of the reasons that Garden is so powerful, I think, for teams as well. So if you're like a dev, you might be comfortable with just using Docker Compose. And that might be something that gets the job done for you. But we find that Garden's value really scales when you have a team, especially like on larger teams. And the reason for that is, first of all, is the caching functionality that you can share. So I'm going to jump over to my side of things. Are you ready for that, Eysi?
I'm ready for that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And let's see. So I'm just going to open up my Garden dashboard here. And if I go to, then I can get this same graph that you're familiar with. And you can also write your commands directly into the dashboard, which I think is pretty cool. So if we do, let's see. So how would we want to showcase this? Maybe an image build?
Sure. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm just going to type in build, and you can see that the image is already built. Now you might say, oh, well, Tao, you probably just like built this, locally, and that's what we're seeing now. Well, actually what's happening is that since Eysi and I are both using the same remote Kubernetes cluster, we're using separate namespaces, like specific developer namespaces. And this is powerful because I can be doing my work, Eysi can be doing his work, but what we're sharing is our image layers, which is pretty cool. And we're also sharing our tests. Our tests are cached as well. And soon we're going to have distributed caching of like your script runs. So these image layers that are already built, this is saving me time because I'm using the image layers that Eysi already built, which is pretty cool. Now you can see that if I do like a test, it's going to run through all of these, and these are already deployed as well. It's already recognized that these are cached. So you end up saving a lot of time. Now, is it you that's running the?
So if you switch over, to my screen again, I suppose.
Yeah. Let's go back to you.
So like just on the topic of collaboration, so I moved away from the live page to the commands page here, and here I can see basically command results across my team, right? So I can see the deploys and the Garden commands really that I've been running, but also the ones that Tao has been running. And for instance, here is a deploy command that you ran earlier. So I can see the results of that command, and I can click in here and literally like open up your version of the code. I don't know if you made any changes, if it's going to be the same as mine, but like just in terms of collaboration, this is great for sharing work in progress, sharing preview environments because everything's remote, but also if you need help, like if your test had failed, I could have like dug up that command results or found the command results rather from that test run. I can see what the error is. I can help you debug. I mean, for that matter, I even have access to your running system. So that's great for collaboration. And I mean, it's the two of us building two services, but imagine like 10 or 100 services, or a team of 10 people, or an entire organization for that matter. So like these time savings really compound once you get to larger systems, larger teams, more services. So that's there's a lot of benefit in that.
Speaking of those time savings, can we take a look at the because Garden we're introducing to the free tier soon, I think, how much time a user has saved. Can we see that briefly?
Yes, we can. It's fun you should ask. Well, first of all, so I'm just showing you, this is also an example project, but I will note that, for instance, on our website, you'll see like actual case studies from, real world companies. Obviously, most companies are real world. One of which reduced their CI time from, I think, an hour and a half to a couple of minutes, just by virtue of caching. Like they're building and deploying all the things for every single CI run, but now they're more or less caching all the things. Another company is able to run something like 100 plus end-to-end tests for a system of 130 services multiple times a day. And again, like this, they're only able to do this thanks to the caching that Garden provides them. So these are kind of the real world numbers. But let me see. This is also just from an example project, but still it's larger than the one I just showed you. It is a proper microservice example still. If you take a brief look at the graph, you can see there's a bunch of builds here. It's an e-commerce website with, ad service, card service, checkout service, currency service, the things you would expect from a e-commerce site. And these are heavy things. Like we've been, building and deploying like, Python and JavaScript stuff, but these are Java services. There's a handful of Go services in there, probably some NPM or Node.js as well. But you see, like on average, like building the ad service takes on average 7 minutes. Building the checkout service takes on average 8 minutes. So when I ran a Garden deploy earlier and all of these were already cached, it saved me, well, like the total time savings were 58 minutes. So accounting for like all the builds. So like, because Garden also parallelizes things, it would have been faster. Like the actual command would have taken less than 58 minutes. But in terms of like, compute resources, this is 58 minutes of builds running that we were able to save. And this is functionality that will be landing or be available to all Garden users in the coming weeks, very soon. We're like, as you can see, we already have it running in our staging environment. And we'll be looking to release it to our users as soon as possible. But this is useful for two things. One, it kind of, shows you the time savings you're getting, but also probably even more importantly, the time savings you're not getting. So if you have something like, if something feels off or is misconfigured, if you're not getting the cache hits you would expect, this will surface that and help you get to the bottom of that. Reach out to us like, hey, this thing keeps getting rebuilt when it shouldn't. What am I doing wrong? So I think this is probably equally important in terms of surfacing the time savings you're not getting when you should be getting them.
Anonym has a question, which is how does the per person namespacing work with cluster wide resources like monitoring, ingress controllers, etc.?
That's a great question. That's a big question. So it is really up to the user to configure that. Garden doesn't really do any magic. So when I do Garden deploy from my laptop, and then when Tao does Garden deploy from his laptop, we just use Garden's templating system to kind of inject our respective usernames into the namespace that Kubernetes will deploy to, the host names that Kubernetes will use, or like the hosts we put in the ingresses. But you can do whatever. This could also be a PR number or a branch name in the case of pull requests. And these could also be hard-coded values. So if you have things you want to share, that should be like, that live in a central namespace, you just don't inject a template string that is kind of, command run specific. You can just hard code a value such that it's consistent for all the people in that environment, if that answers the question.
Cool. We'll check in on Anonym. Can we go back to can you open the preview link that we were at before? And then
Yes.
so we'll see this UI, our front end here. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so Eysi's going to open this. You can see I've actually already changed this color scheme once on my side, right? And that's because Eysi is looking into, and on our free tier, we're going to be rolling this out where teams can actually directly collaborate by opening their preview links, preview environment links, and then they can say, oh, okay, I can see what's going on here, right? And we have that close collaboration. So what I'm going to do on my end is I'm just going to share my VS Code window here briefly. And so I've changed this color once. I'm going to change it again. We're going to do a hot pink. Okay.
Ooh. Like that.
And yep. And now if what I'm going to do is so I'm going to share, let's see. So I'm going to go back to this. Is this the right one? Let's see, demo.app. Yep. And we're going to go back to our live screen. And now I'm going to type in deploy. You can see here the logs are streaming in. If I go back to the graph, you can see that it shows that the image is being built, right? And the image is actually being built. It's important to note that we Garden has remote image builders built in to Garden, so you don't have to configure. We support 2 Canico and cluster build kit, and so these are image builders that are actually running in your remote Kubernetes cluster. And so it's usually this stuff is a little bit like dark magic. You have to go off and do it with another tool, and it's annoying and frustrating. Here it's just built into Garden. It's really easy to get started. So saying that, if we go back to Eysi's screen, we can see
that's hot pink. That's hot pink right there.
Hot pink. Yep. So it's that those collaborative features are built into the bones of Garden, as compared to something like Docker Compose, where typically you're going to be passing. Yes, your containers are these powerful artifacts that run everywhere, but the collaborative tooling that's built around that container metaphor and those abstractions is difficult to reproduce. Here with Garden, it's all in one place, one-stop shop. Yeah,
for sure. I say a lot of our users, they come to Garden from Docker Compose. I would argue for 2 primary reasons. One is that their system has grown and it doesn't fit on their laptops anymore. With Docker Compose running locally, they need to lift it away from the laptops, and they need the power of the cloud to be able to run their entire stack. And they want it. They want to be able to do that. They want to be able to shift the ability to run the entire stack as far left as you can, whether that's so you can run tests as you develop, or whether that's for creating premium environments, or literally just iterating on the code proper in a production environment. The other reason is also just what you were saying, this collaboration aspect of it, building this, because again, for these teams, most likely their stack still runs on Kubernetes production. Docker Compose is not production-like enough. Even if it fits on their laptops per se, they're missing just the collaboration and this bridge from local code to Kubernetes. And I think it's important to be mindful of so we're not saying, throw Kubernetes at every developer and just have them figure it out. I think the important thing here for this to be a successful journey is to give your developers the ability to opt into these things when they need them. So let's say you're happy, running something just locally, just your day, you start your day with npm run dev, or Python app.py or whatever that may be, and you can iterate, and that's great. But when you need something more realistic, when you need to run a test that touches on more than a single service, or test whether your changes, whether that's manually, actually work with the upstream stuff, or anything like that, or share work in progress in a proper premium environment, you should be able to do that. You should we don't want to gatekeep this like awesome, powerful cloud native technology and keep it away from developers, but we want to expose it to them in such a way that they can work with it when they need it, learn more, gradually like pull in more and more parts of it and integrate it with their local development workflows. But you don't need to like do everything on day one, I suppose.
Yeah, right. We're happy to meet you where you are.
Exactly.
And then scale with you. And that's something that I really love about Garden. Like for me, I run all my hobby projects on Garden. And for me, it was really easy to just get started with a, one Kubernetes manifest or one Helm chart. And then I could start adding my tests in, sprinkle a little of this. I even started adding like infrastructure as code because we support Pulumi and Terraform. We could talk a little bit more about that later. But, if I had all these infrastructure dependencies that my services would run on. And so I could actually just weave that directly in.
And you have all these like local, like you have your Pyrex like all over, like you have
yeah, it's true.
Like,
yeah.
Kubernetes like in your cupboard, open your software.
Exactly.
There's Kubernetes
I run an OpenShift cluster in my electrical closet.
Exactly.
which is fun. I've had that running for about a year and a half now. I love the whole self-hosted movement. I've been running like my own Docker Compose stacks forever. So I've been slowly sort of moving over to Kubernetes everything. And Garden's
by
really
the passion.
helpful.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's yeah, exactly. So maybe we can next showcase just so we can get a little dynamicism, the code synchronization, and
yes,
just talk about that a little bit.
Exactly. This, I suppose, comes back to kind of the inner loop developer story. So let me see. I have everything. I have Garden running in dev mode. So I switched back to the main branch where we have the full proper graph, if you remember. And earlier with Tao, made changes to the colors, and then click the button to rebuild and redeploy the web part of the system. That's really cool. Like only these two actions here were executed. So Garden figured out to leave the rest alone because they hadn't changed at all, and that's great. But again, we're working with example projects. It's Python this and Node.js that, and it's fast anyway. It's not sometimes rebuilding or redeploying. Well, most often rebuilding or redeploying is not a good story if you're doing like inner loop development. But also if you're just like using Garden to set up end-to-end testing or write out or configure or author rather your CI pipelines, you still want to be able to kind of test these things rapidly as you iterate on them, as opposed to waiting for rebuilds and redeploys all the time. The way you do that is you deploy your system in sync mode. From the dashboard, you can just open this here little.
Oh wow! I didn't even know that this was built in the dashboard. This is pretty cool.
Exactly. Yeah. And you just click. It shows you a list of all the syncs. So if you don't have any syncs, that's what we call like the kind of code syncing configuration. If you don't have any defined for your project,
local host directly inside the container or Helm
chart. Exactly.
Yeah.
So like live reloading, hot reloading, code syncing, call it what you want. We're old school. We just call it syncs, but I don't know, like blazing fast hot reloading is probably a better, more marketable title. But anyway, you can click here. You'll see a list of all your syncs. Again, if you don't have any configured, it's just going to show you like the database, for instance, obviously doesn't have syncs. These do. So you can see like from what directory on your local machine we're syncing and into what directory in what target. So it's the deployment called API and this here directory. So I just click here, and as you would expect, it's going to start my syncs. Again, the containers are already built, but the services will be redeployed. We need to redeploy them in sync mode.
Are these service is it done with a sidecar, or how does it work?
Yeah. So under the hood, we use a tool called Mutagen, which is really fantastic piece of technology. And yes, it's installed, injected as a sidecar, a Mutagen agent with the deploy. So, and it's super easy to configure syncs as well. So I'm gonna, let's take a look at the sync for the web as well. So you can see here that it's just called, it's under the spec, of course, it's just called sync. You specify the path. In this case, we're just this source path to this container path. The reason you can specify multiple paths is that you may want to do reverse syncing as well. But here we're just doing the like kind of default one-way syncing. We're excluding node modules, and we're overriding this here command. So typically when you do a Garden deploy and you run your container, it would start up with a command like npm run serve, or however you start your server. But in dev mode, we want to do npm run dev, so it's using this one. And if you're wondering what's up with all the red mess in my terminal, I think it's to do with the npm run dev command for this particular example project is just super slow. It takes a while to get started, and the syncing times out in the meantime. So I'm just gonna run this one more time and apologize to the audience. I'll make sure to have a better example set up next time around. But you can see that as Garden kind of reruns it, it sees that, okay, the service finally started. It's just something poorly configured in the health checks or whatever. But we're keeping it real on Interlab Live. We're not hiding anything.
No. So, this is it's just us, bare, not quite naked, but we're out there. We're just presenting it as it is. For sure. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. So so now my service should be deployed in sync mode, and again I can open this up here. Similar to Tao, I have my flowers versus trees version of the app, but you'll notice that like here it's injected my username into the URL actually. So this is how we make sure that my deployments or increases or whatever don't override what Tao is doing. And if I switch over to the colors file here and change the color, so this is the file that renders the colors for the front end of this silly voting application, and you can see that it updates immediately. You probably saw that in the background, but it's super fast. So what's happening is that the code that's on my laptop is Garden is kind of like via mutagen live syncing that to a Kubernetes cluster somewhere, I believe, down in Frankfurt. I'm calling from Berlin, Tao's in Copenhagen, but it's still lightning fast. So it really gives you. So typically there's a trade-off, right? There's a trade-off between kind of realism and the speed of your feedback loop. You can have your, production-like environments, you can spin the whole thing up, but feedback is going to be slow because it requires rebuilding and redeploying and pushing container images and pulling the container images back in and so on and so forth. I'd like to argue that this gives you the cake and that you can eat it too. So you have this realistic production-like environment, but it still feels like a local, like you're iterating on this kind of at the speed of thought, if you will. And so these are like interpreted languages, but it works the same with your Java or Go stack. The way you rapidly iterate on your Java or Go or Rust, you never really rapidly recompile Rust, I suppose, but you get the picture. The way you do that for local developers today, that just translates neatly into the same remote development experience. You just use the overrides and whatever command you use to start your dev environment, you just run that from the container, and you have a lot of options in terms of configuring that and so on and so forth.
I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that at this point, both Go and Rust have plenty of sort of they're compiled languages, but you can run their agents that allow for this hot reloading feature. You can just call it directly in your Garden. You can just put it in your Garden declarative file, and Garden will call it just as if you were doing it outside of. So it's where the synchronization feature is not dependent on using an interpreted language. It's
exactly
we can use whatever you want, really.
Exactly. And what I think is really cool, it is important that people that we reduce cognitive load. So we're often you're only iterating on one part or a handful of parts of the system at most. But I still think it's really cool that I was messing with the web front end earlier, again in this tiny example project. But if I switch over to the Python API backend and hit save here, that's also going to reload immediately. So you notice that like I added these 3 dots here to the print statement at the beginning. I'll do like this, and you can see that it locks that immediately. So the point is that like these are like different containers and different pods. They're in some sense logically separated, but as long as I can hop between these files on my local file system, I can iterate on it like this. This happens to be a monorepo, but that doesn't matter. This could also be distributed across multiple repos. We have support for that, where kind of Garden pulls in what we call like remote sources or remote repositories, ties it all together to make it feel like a holistic thing, like a single project, if you will. So again, like usually like you're working on one thing at a time, but if say your end-to-end tests, for instance, or integration tests fail, there are times where you need to hop into that other service and figure that out, or get the service owner on the line and have them help you debug things. But it's super powerful to be able to do that, as opposed to getting stuck into kind of a commit, push, run a CI pipeline, wait 30 minutes, try again type of feedback loop.
Yeah, that git, push, pray is the scourge of my existence, and I'm glad that Garden has all but eliminated that.
It is literally because we started Garden.
Yeah. I wanted to share just 2 small things here. For those of you interested in getting started with, if you're Rustation, do they call them Rustations? I think they call them Rustations. I'm not one. I'm a Pythonista, but I just can't put enough love on this article that one of our fans, community members, wrote, called "Entering the Garden of Ferris," and this is about basically creating a really tight inner loop experience for their Rust project. Now, this article is based on an older version of Garden, so it shouldn't be that much of a lift to swap over. But if you're curious how we sort of brighten that experience, I would definitely encourage you to check out this article, "Entering the Garden of Ferris." The other thing I wanted to show briefly, and then maybe Eysi, you and I can talk it over, is so this is a Telegram chatbot that I wrote, and I have a Helm chart here for my Telegram bot service, and you can see just below here is.
I think you need to switch to your screen. By the way, I think we're still looking at my logs.
Oh, there we go. Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to add myself to the stage. So let me go back to, just so everybody can see, this is.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly.
This is the Garden of Ferris, Entering the Garden of Ferris article that I was mentioning. And then.
Love the cover image.
Oh, it's so good. And then if we hop over to this tab, this is my, so I, like I said, I love to self-host everything. So I self-host my own GitLab instance, of course. And this is my Telegram chatbot. And you can see that we have a deployment service here for our Pulumi integration. So we support infrastructure as code tools like Pulumi, like Terraform. And essentially what this is doing here is this is creating, so my project calls the OpenAI's API, and I'm storing my API keys in Azure Key Vault, right? So in order to depend on all that infrastructure, I have this Pulumi action here, which is ensuring that that all of that Azure infrastructure, and when you're working with a hyperscaler like Azure, like AWS, there's a lot of you got to really write out a lot of infrastructure code because there's all these permissions, and you need this previous other account in order to provision just a single Azure Key Vault, right? So this takes care of that, which I think is just really great because it's all in one, right? And we talked a little bit about that before, but just having these holistic tools that take care of the whole, like, nose to tail, right? We're really taking care of the entire microservice stack.
Yes, that's the thing. Like I mean, again, what we've been demoing, like, these are containers that are on Kubernetes. That is the easy part at the end of the day, and that's why the Terraform and Pulumi plugins, they really tie the thing together. It's not about I've been throwing around the word blueprint a lot. It's not about creating a blueprint of how your containers end up on Kubernetes. It's about creating a blueprint of how to go from zero to a running system in the broader sense. And for some of our users, that means using Terraform plugin to literally like spin up a temp cluster on demand, run things in the cluster, tear it back down. For others, it means using Pulumi to provision like a cloud managed database that's persistent, so on and so forth. And I suppose I downplayed the exec action a little bit earlier, the one we're using to kind of map out the system. But I tend to call it like the little action that could, because for all the other things, there are a ton of things that you may need to run locally that you can use that for, like all sorts of alt scripts or any type of custom script. For that matter, you can use our templating system to have like one version run on Windows, another on Linux, and a third on Mac OS, depending on how you set things up. And it's also really powerful to just run these in containers. So even if you're not, you can run containers as you please. That's what we did when we were seeding the database. We spun up a container that connected just over the Kubernetes DNS to the Postgres deployment and ran a command inside there. But that can be used for pretty much anything. You can build your own custom container images with tools installed that you may use, and you can run them in your environment and have them do whatever needs to be done to stand up your system. All the things that are not just about like deploying a container image, because at the end of the day, that's often the easy part. And we all have legacy stuff. We all have craft. We all have, so many parts of our system that we'd love to get away with or get away from, remove that is, but they're there. And, fixing that has been moved to the next quarter. So let's just have nice automation on top of it. And that's the real world.
Absolutely. So we just have about 3 minutes left. I think it's okay that we go just a couple minutes over time. If you wanted to maybe demo some of the features coming soon to the free tier for folks.
Yeah, sure. I kind of did as we were doing this, but I think there's kind of the big story there is being able to share the commands page with your entire team. So the very first iteration of the free tier, the dashboard free tier basically, is a single user experience. That was just intentional. We wanted to get it out, but like the goal was always to make it a team experience, because developing software, in particular distributed systems at the type of scale that we're talking about, it's a team sport, no man's an island. So it's all about collaborating with your team. So we're very excited to be bringing those capabilities to the dashboard at app.garden.io. And what that means is you can create a team, you can add people there, and you can see basically what they're doing on the commands page. You can help them debug. You can help onboard new users. Just a lot of things you can do with that. And if you go from there to the enterprise tier, there's even more. Like a lot of that, it includes insights capabilities to help you kind of track usage, how DevX is progressing along, I suppose. Sometimes make the analogy that DevX is often being like a frog, is often like being a frog being boiled alive, in that like you don't like, it just gradually gets a little worse over time, but you're not quite sure if it is getting worse. There are things you can obviously easily measure on like your Dora metrics, but things like, is this build getting slower? Is this test flakier than it used to be? And you can track that. And specifically like for platform teams that are like authoring and kind of entering this experience to engineering teams, it is crucial to be able to track that and see if the things that they are building out actually work for people. But coming back to the free tier, it's the team functionality for sure. And we're also, long story short, we're improving the caching experience. We saw a lot of that earlier in the demo, but we're doing even more on that front to make it even better, increase your chances of a cache hit, and make it work across more environments at the end of the day.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for co-hosting this live stream with me today. I'm going to be dropping a comment here in the the chat sidebar. It should go out to at least YouTube and Twitch that lets people know where to find us. Get started with the free tier at app.garden.io. Otherwise, join our Discord community server. And then I've also included a link to Donut's Rust article if you're a Rustacean and you're looking to get started with Garden. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you all next time after the holidays.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay. Happy New Year, everyone. Bye.